What's up everybody, and welcome to a new video. And in this video we're gonna go over my notes for the Jupyter extension. So the first one is here about the prerequisite, namely the extension itself is not a Jupyter kernel, so this extension here, and therefore then you need to install the respective kernel for your specific programming language. And here I have a link to a list of all the available kernels. So for example, for Julia, you would need to install iJulia, and for Python, you would need to install IPy-kernel. And here I also have a side note, namely, you can also just install the Jupyter Notebook, Jupyter Lab, or the whole Jupyter package with your package manager of choice, because they all contain IPy-kernel. Okay, so this is the prerequisite if you want to use this Jupyter extension. So now let's go over the notes for the Jupyter Notebook. And here the first one is about initiating a notebook. And here then the first note is about creating a notebook, and here you can do it, for example, via the command palette with this command here. So if you go to the command palette and then search for new Jupyter, then you have here this create new Jupyter notebook command. So that you can create it this way, or what you also can do is simply create a new file and then save it with this IPyNB extension. So if I press Ctrl N and then save that as file.ipynb and then save it, and then as you can see, this also creates here a Jupyter notebook. So let's put this here to the side, and this is how you can create a notebook. And then, however, before you can run any code, you need to select a kernel with this kernel picker here. So here let's go to Python environments and let's choose Python. Okay, so this is how you initiate a notebook. So now let's get to the notebook toolbar, and here in this first section you have these three options. The first one is generate. So this has something to do with GitHub Copilot, and again, as I said in the first video, this is one of those additional topics that I'm not going to cover in more detail. So if you want to know more about that, then you can check out this link here. Okay, so then next to that we have a button to create a code cell, and then here we have a button to create a markdown cell. And just a side note, if you hover at the bottom of a cell, then you also have these options here available. And for the very first one, you also see them at the top. Okay, so then here to see the second section better, let me make this editor here bigger. So then here in the second section, we have this run all button. So this runs all the cells. So to show that, let me write here some code. So let's simply say hello world. And then let's create a new code cell. And here I've prepared some code. So let's paste this. So now let's run all the cells. And this then simply runs these cells here. And if the code is currently running, then this button here turns into an interrupt button. So with that, then you can interrupt the kernel. And then here normally next to that, there's a restart button. So let me just quickly open the sidebar. So now here there's this restart button, and with that you can restart the kernel, i.e. with that you can clear the state of the notebook. So for example, if I here print out the I, then it's currently at 8. So, and now if I restart the kernel, then as you can see, now it's not defined because the state of the notebook was cleared. And the potential use case for this is when you're done working on your notebook, what you can do is simply restart the notebook and then run all the cells just to check if everything runs as expected. Okay, so then next here we have clear all outputs. So with that we can simply clear the outputs of those cells. And then lastly we have this go to button. So currently it says go to most recently failed. So if I, for example, scroll down and then click this button, then it jumps to that respective cell. And here, if the code is currently running, then it says go to running cell. So if I scroll down and then click this button, then it jumps to the currently running cell. Okay, so this is the second section. And here in the third section, you have this Jupyter variables button. And to show how that works, let me here delete those cells. And then here I've prepared some code. And before we run that, let's restart the notebook and then run this cell. So now if you click this Jupyter variables button, then what it does, it opens the Jupyter view in the panel, and this contains a list with all the variables created in the current Jupyter session. So this list here is then, you can sort that by name. So for example, in the alphabetical order or reverse alphabetical order. Or you can also sort it by type in alphabetical order or reverse alphabetical order. And this table here updates automatically when new variables are created. So for example, if I type here number 4 and then say 2.5 and then run the cell, then you can see this gets automatically updated. And just a side note, some variables allow a more deeper inspection. So for example, here I have prepared a list. And if I run this, then you can see here in this table, there's this button next to this list of names variable. And if you click that, then you get this message here that a data viewer extension is required to view the data frames. So if I click yes here, then it goes to the extensions tab and then here recommends this data wrangler extension. Okay, so this is this Jupyter variables view. And then lastly here we have the outline button, which simply opens the outline view. And we've already talked about the outline view, so I will put a link to that video into the video description. So then lastly, in the overflow menu, you can export the Jupyter Notebook as a Python script, HTML or PDF. You can customize the notebook layout. So this opens the settings filter down to settings related to the notebook layout. Then you can toggle breadcrumbs. So, and this applies not only to Jupyter Notebooks, but to all files. And then lastly, what you can do is to toggle the line numbers for all the cells in the notebook. So you can toggle it on and off. Okay, so this is the notebook toolbar. So now let's go over the notes for the code cells. And here the first one is about the cell toolbar. So to show that, let me delete those cells here. And then here I've prepared some code. And here, the first option that you have is this run by line button. And what this does, it allows you to run the code line by line, and this requires at least IPy 6. So if I click this, then we get these two options here. We can run the next line. So with that, you can step through the code line by line, and then here we have continue execution. And here, just as a side note, if you use this together with the Jupyter view in the panel, then this can serve as a lightweight debugger. Okay, so now let's continue the execution. Then here the next button is execute above cells. So to show that, let me here create a new cell and then say print hello world. And then let me copy this. And then before we run the cell, let's clear all the outputs. And now if I click this button here, what it does is it executes all the cells above the cell, but not the cell itself. And then here, the next button is to execute cell and all below it. So therefore, let's again copy those print statements and then clear all the outputs. And now if I click this button, then it executes the cell itself and then all the cells below that cell. So then the next option here that you have is a split cell. So to show that, I have prepared some other code. So this lets you split the cell based on the current cursor position. So for example, if I put the cursor here at the front of those variables and then split cell, then they get split into the next cell. And again, if I do this here for the print statements, split, and then they get split in the next cell. And then you can also join those cells again. Here we are at the overflow menu. So join with previous cell, or you can also do join with next cell. So this is this split button and how you can join those cells together. Then here in the overflow menu, there you have some options here in this first three sections where it's basically easier to use those respective keyboard shortcuts. And then here in the last three sections, they relate to this extension pack here, which we will cover in the next video. Okay, so that's the overflow menu. And then lastly, you have this button here to delete the cell. Okay, so this is the cell toolbar. So then the next note is about the play button left to the cell. So this button here. So with that, you can simply execute a cell. But what you also can do is here, if I put in some other code and then run this, you can also then interrupt the code with this button here. And then next to this button, you have this drop-down arrow. and with that you can debug the cell. So with this you have access to the full functionality of debugging, and we've already covered debugging in another video, so I will put a link to that video into the description. And here, however, you also need at least IPy kernel 6. Okay, so that's this play button. Then next is the overflow menu left to the cell output. So this here you can add cell output to chat. So this again has something to do with GitHub Copilot. And then here you can clear cell outputs or copy the cell outputs. And then here lastly, last note is about the cell status bar. So this provides information about the current state of the cell. So for example, if I here run all, then you can see here the screen check mark indicates that the execution was successful. These circling arrows here indicate that it's currently running. Then this circle arrow here with a clock indicates that it's pending. And now if I stop this here, then you can see here this red circle with an X. So this means that the execution failed. And then the other information that it provides is the current or final runtime of the cell. So the final runtime of this cell here was 21 seconds. And if I click here with the play button again, you can see that that it is currently running. Okay, so this is the information that the status bar provides. And then the cell status bar also contains a language picker. So with that you can switch between Markdown and code. And here I also have a side note, namely this is about switching to a programming language that is different from the kernel. Namely in that case, the language editing features like syntax highlighting or IntelliSense work, but you can't run the code. And to show that, I've prepared here another Jupyter notebook. So here I use the Julia kernel, and then here if I run the cell, then it works. And now if I, however, for example, here copy in Python code and then detect that, then you can see that it detects that it is Python code, and we also have here syntax highlighting, and we also have IntelliSense available. However, I can't run this code here. So if I want to run it, then I would have to switch back to the Python kernel. So now let's see if we can run it. And now I can run this. However, obviously then I can't run this Julia code here because we then get an error. So if you want to use multiple languages within one notebook, then you could use here this polyglot notebooks extension. So, okay, so this is the side note that I want to cover. And with that now we've covered all the notes that I wanted to cover with respect to code cells. So now let's go over the notes for the Markdown cells. And here the first one is about the cell toolbar. And to show that, I've prepared another file. So let's open that over here. And then here in the toolbar you also have the options to split cell, and then here this overflow menu, and here to delete the cell. And additionally then here you have the option to run cells in section. So this works here for headings. So if I click this now, then it runs all the code cells or all the cells in that heading here. So it runs these code cells here, but it doesn't run these code cells because they belong to the second heading here. And then you have here this button to edit the cell. So this way then you can edit the markdown, and this way, or this then turns into the stop editing cell, which then renders the markdown. So that's the cell toolbar. Then the cell status bar. Here you only have the language picker and not this additional information here that you have with code cells. And then here I also have some side notes. The first one is about the collapse and expand arrow left to the cell. So with that, I mean this arrow here, and with that you can collapse or expand all the cells that belong to a certain heading. So this first heading here, there are 6 cells, and then they are now hidden. Or for example, if I fold this, then I only fold the cells that belong to this 1.1 heading. So that's this side note. And then lastly, the last side note is about the table of contents. So this is available here in the outline view. So here it depicts the headings. And if you click it, then you can quickly navigate to the respective heading. And if you double click, then it actually jumps into the file. And then here, if you hover over such an entry, then you have here this toolbar where you can run cells in section, or you can also fold the section. And then here, just a side note, by default, this outline view here only shows Markdown, but you can also show the code. And therefore, to activate that, go to the settings and then search for notebook outline. And then here you have this option to show code cells. So if I enable that and then go back to here to this file and then unfold this, then you can see that it shows here the first lines of those code cells. So this is the setting. And with that, now we've covered all the nodes that I wanted to cover with respect to Markdown cells. So now lastly, let's go over the side notes here. And the first one is about interaction with cells. Namely, you can collapse or expand the cell or the cell output. And to show that, let's go back to this file here. So now if you want to collapse a cell, simply click here this vertical bar left to the cell. And if you want to collapse the output, then click this vertical bar left to the output. And alternatively, what you also can do is simply click here into, or double click into this area left to the output or left to the cell. Okay, so this is how you can collapse and expand cells. Then you can also select multiple cells. So for example, let's say we want to select those first 3 cells. To do that, select the first cell and then hold Shift and click on the last cell. So this way now we have selected those 3. And you can also select individual cells. So for example, if I select this first cell and then hold Control and click this third cell and fifth cell, now we have selected those 3 cells. So then lastly, you can also move cells around. So therefore simply click into this area here left to the cell or the output, and then you can drag and drop the cell around. And this also works for Markdown. So let's here create a Markdown file, Markdown cell, and create a heading. So then if that gets rendered, then you can actually click anywhere on the cell and then move that around. And this drag and dropping also works with multiple cells. So if I select also this cell, now I can move both of these cells around. Okay, so these are my notes for how to interact with cells. So the next side note is about working with plots. And to show that, I've prepared here again some code. So let's paste this and then run the cell. And then we get here this plot depicted. And here you have a toolbar. So with the first action here, you can copy to clipboard. Here you can save as, and here you can save the image as a PNG. And then with this button here, you can expand the image, which opens here this plot viewer. And here again, you have a toolbar. So you have here these arrows where you can cycle through the plots. So if you have multiple plots open, so therefore let's simply again here click on this button. So now we have 2 of these plots, and you can click at them or use those arrows here. Then here with this option you can pan. So you can pan here in this plot. You can also zoom in and zoom out, and therefore you could also use the mouse wheel. Then here again you can save, and here you can actually save as PDF, PNG and SVG. And then lastly, the last option in this toolbar is here to delete the plot again from the plot viewer. Okay, so those are already my notes for working with plots. So then the next side note is about search within a notebook, and you can access that with Control F. And this has basically the same functionality as with regular source code files. And we've already covered that in a previous video, so I will put a link to that video into the video description. And here, however, you have one more additional search option, which is this find filters. And here you can specify where you want to search within the notebook. So to show that, let me transform this file, this cell here into a Markdown file cell, and then copy that. And then here, let's go into edit mode, and now let's search for hello. And now if you open those find filters, let's say, for example, you don't want to search within the Markdown source. So if you toggle this off, then it doesn't search within Markdown source. Or if you don't want to search within code cell output, then this hello here is also not considered. Okay, so this is how those find filters work. And with that, now we've covered already all the nodes that I want to cover with this search within the notebook functionality. So then the last side note is about the notebook diff editor. And here again, this has basically the same functionality as with regular source code files. So again, I will put the link to the respective video where we talked about this into the video description. But now, just to show those additional features here, let me copy those two notebooks here and paste them into the root of the workspace. And then let's open notebook 1, and then here run all, and then also open notebook 2, and here also run all. And now to open the diff editor, let's right click notebook 1 and then select for compare, and then right click notebook 2 and compare with selected. So this opens here the diff editor, and here now the additional features are the following. Namely, you have 3 different categories of diffs. So you have diffs for the metadata, for the input, and also for the output here. And then the next additional feature is here in the editor toolbar. So there you have this open text diff editor button. So this opens then the diff editor of the underlying JSON files, because under the hood notebooks are JSON files. So let's close this here again. And then also here in the overflow menu, you have the options to toggle off or on the metadata differences or the output differences. So those are the additional features for the editor toolbar. And then here in the notebook, you also have these diff toolbars. So here for the metadata, input data, and output data, you have this revert changes button. So revert outputs, revert inputs, and revert metadata. So for example, here now it says import statements, and here it says imports. So if I revert that, then it also states here imports. So those are these options. And then here with the input, you also have a toggle to show leading and trailing whitespace. And then here for the output data, you have this toggle to switch the output rendering. So you can see the output as plain text or see this in this rendered way. So for example, this also works here for this output. So this is then the plain text, and this is what it looks like when it is rendered. And then the difference is that the right side here is editable. So for example, here I can actually edit the code if you want to. Okay, so this is the notebook diff editor. And with that, now we've covered all the nodes that I wanted to cover with that. And with that, now we've covered all the nodes that I wanted to cover with respect to Jupyter notebooks. So now let's go over the nodes for the Python interactive window. And the first one is about the purpose. So what is it for? Namely, as the name implies, it is to write and run Python code interactively. So in that way, it's similar to the Python REPL. And then there are different ways of opening it. You can open it as a standalone console. So therefore you can use the command palette and this command. So for example, then if you go here to the command palette and then here search for interactive window, then you have here the command create interactive window. And this then opens that. Alternatively, you can also open it with a file. So let's close this here again. And then here I've prepared a file. And now to run that, there is then also a command palette command, and it's this one here. So now let's go to the file and then command palette. And now if you search for interactive window, then you can also run current file in interactive window. So this then runs this file in the interactive window and automatically executes here this code. And then another alternative would be to use this drop-down arrow here next to this play button, and here you also have the command run current file in interactive window. Okay, so this is how you can open the interactive window. So now let's go over the nodes for how to use the interactive window. Namely, here in this input box at the bottom, you can write your code. So for example, if I say here for I in range 5, and then if you press enter, you get to the next line and then can keep writing your code. And then to execute it, you have to press enter twice. So now if I press it twice, then the code here is depicted in the interactive window with these Jupyter-like cells where you see the input and the output. And here, just a side note, you can also run the code here with this play button, and you can change this here to shift enter. So if you press shift enter, then the code gets executed. Therefore, you need to go to the settings. So let's open here the settings, and then here search for interactive and then shift. So here's the setting to execute with shift enter. And now if I enable that, then it switches here to shift enter. So then you can use enter to get to the next line and shift enter to execute the code. Okay, so this is the basic usage, and I also have here some side notes. Namely, IntelliSense is available here. So for example, if I type PR and then press Control space, then I get here the member list. And if I, for example, use then print, and then here within the parentheses, Control Shift space, then I also get here these parameter hints. So that's IntelliSense. Then here the next side note is that you can rerun cells, but you can't modify the code. So for example, if I create here a list and then run this, and then write list.append a 1 and then print out that list again, then now there's a 1 in this list. And now if I click into this cell and then press shift enter, then I actually execute the cell again. And now if I print out the list, then it's actually empty again. And here, however, you can't modify this code. So if I try to modify it, nothing happens. And then lastly, the last side note is that you can use the up and down arrow keys to cycle through the command history. So here, if I now press the up arrow keys, then I can cycle through the command history. Okay, so those are my notes for how to use the interactive window. So now let's quickly go over the different toolbars, and let's start with the interactive window. So here you basically have the same options as with the toolbar in the Jupyter Notebook. So you can interrupt, you can clear all outputs, restart the kernel, open the Jupyter variables view. And here this one is different because here you can export the interactive window to a Jupyter Notebook. So this would then save it as a Jupyter Notebook. Then here in the overflow menu, you can also export to a Python script, HTML or PDF. And then you have options to collapse and expand all the cells here. So let's expand them here. And then here in the cell toolbar, you have the options to copy the cell, to delete the cell, and then here go to code. So this is useful when you have started the interactive window with this run kern file in interactive window command. So then if you click this button here, then you can jump to the respective code in that file. Okay, so those are my notes for the toolbars. So now let's go over these side notes here. And the first one is about the kernel picker. So this is here on the top right corner of the interactive window, and with it you can switch to another kernel. And then the second side note is about working with plots. Namely, this works the same as with Jupyter Notebooks. So in the interactive window, you then have the same functionality as we've seen earlier in this video with the Jupyter Notebooks. And then the third side note is about executing a selection of code in a Python file. So for example, if I select here this for loop and then right click that, then here we have the option to run the selection in the Python terminal. And we can do that, for example, also with shift enter. So if I press here shift enter, then this opens the terminal and then runs this code here in the Python wrapper. And via the settings, you can actually change that so that this code here is sent to the interactive window instead. So again, let's here press shift enter. So now here you can see it has been executed. And now if you want to send that to the interactive window, then you need to enable this setting here, execute selection. So now again, if I press shift enter, then you can see it gets here executed in the interactive window and not in the Python wrapper anymore. Okay, so those are those first three side notes. So then the last side note is about Jupyter-like cells within a Python file. So how you can create them is by adding these comments here. So to create a code cell, you can add this comment, and by to create a Markdown cell, you can create this comment. So to see that in action, let's go back to this file here, and now let's add here a comment and then the 2% signs to create a code cell. So then here you have these code lenses and this Jupyter-like cell. So here you can run the cell, run below and debug the cell. So let's run it. So then it gets executed in the interactive window. And here, if you want to create a markdown cell, simply add then here the brackets and write into that markdown. And the way that you then create the markdown or write the markdown is always start with a pound symbol, and then you can use the respective markdown syntax. So for example, if you want to create a heading, then use a pound symbol and then heading. So now if we run this then gets rendered in the interactive window. But here, in my opinion, it's probably simpler to just use regular Jupyter notebooks instead of these Jupyter-like cells within the notebook. Okay, so that's how you basically use those Jupyter-like cells. And here I also have some side notes. The first one is about exporting to a Jupyter notebook, and you can do that via the command palette via these two commands here. So let's see that in action. So therefore, let's open here the command palette and then simply search for Python and then Jupyter. So here we have those two commands: export current Python file and output as Jupyter Notebook, or just export current Python file as Jupyter Notebook. So let's run this here. And then let's put it into our VS Code folder and let's call this test. And then let's export it. So this now creates this Python file here as a Jupyter Notebook. So here it is. And if we open it, then it looks like this. Okay, so this is the first side note. Then the second one is about respective keyboard shortcuts. So here I have a link for that. So here are some respective keyboard shortcuts that you can use with these Jupyter-like cells. And then the last side note is about a code example to demonstrate a potential workflow. So therefore I have here again prepared some code. So let's paste this into here. So let's say the task is to reverse the order of the words in a string. So this is our initial string, and what the end result should be is that it should say text sum is this. So the way that we could maybe approach that would be to first say, let's just try to reverse the string. So therefore, let's say text and then brackets colon -1. And then now if I press Control Enter, then I can execute this command, and then here we can see that it's not what we want because it just reversed the characters. So let's try a different approach. So let's simply try to split the string up. So let's say text.split and see what that looks like. Now we have here this list with those individual words. So that looks good. So let's save that into a variable. So let's call this words. And then next, let's now try to reverse this list here. So therefore then say words, brackets, and then colon -1. And now let's run this to see what it looks like. And now we have here this list which has the words text sum is this. So this is almost what we want. So let's save that again into a variable called words reversed. And now lastly, we want to transform this list here back to a string, and therefore we can use the string method join, and we want to join on a space. So let's say here a space and then join our words reversed. So again, let's see what it looks like with Control Enter. And now we have here our final result, text sum is this. So this looks good. So again, let's save that into a variable called text reversed. And then let's simply print that out. And let's run it again to see the final result. So this is now our final result. So this is what we want. And this is what a potential workflow with these Jupyter-like cells could look like. So okay, now with that we have covered all the side notes here. And with that then therefore we have covered all the notes that I wanted to cover with respect to the Python interactive window. So then the next note is about the extension pack. However, we will cover that in the next video. So let's go straight to the side notes. And the first one states that you can use magic commands. So to show that, I've prepared here again some code. So here, let's run this. So here I have used the time@magic command, and with that we can get here these results. So this is the first side note. The second side note is that you can connect to a remote Jupyter server to offload intensive computation. And here I've included a link where you can find out more about that. Okay, so those are already the side notes. And with that, now we've covered all the notes that I wanted to cover with respect to the Jupyter extension. So we've reached the end of this video, and then in the next video we will go over the notes for the extension pack. So thanks for watching, and hopefully I will see you in the next video.